Have you ever walked into a place and felt like you simply didn't exist? Not in the philosophical sense of we're just specks of dust in the vast universe, but in a real chillingly tangible way. You're physically present, breathing, standing right there. Yet every glance, every movement around you passes you by as if... That's exactly how Jerome Wilson, a 47-year-old man and owner of a world-class hotel chain, is feeling in what's supposed to be his own home. The irony? This isn't just any hotel. In fact, it's the crown jewel of the empire he built from the ground up. A place designed to make guests feel like royalty, where a single night's stay could cost as much as a typical family's monthly rent. And yet here stands Jerome, the man who created the very definition of flawless service, silent at the front desk, like a forgotten shadow in his own kingdom. No one recognizes him, no one cares, and that is no accident. Jerome isn't here for leisure or a routine inspection. He's here because a wave of complaints has been swelling, coming from guests, from junior staff, all pointing to this very location. Terrible customer service, signs of discrimination, a mysteriously fully booked system that only seems to apply to certain types of guests. In the past, Jerome could have handled it the usual way: call an emergency meeting, issue a few vague directives, blame it on a system glitch, and wait for it to blow over. But not this time. This time he chose a different path. He arrived quietly, no suit, no luxury car, no entourage, just a regular guest booking a one-night stay. And in that moment, Jerome, the man, once welcomed like royalty, stood in silence, waiting for a single glance from the staff. He didn't have to wait long. Greeting him was a young woman, probably in her 20s, with blonde hair tied up high. Her name was Kim. The way she stood, the blank look in her eyes, the phone glued to her hand, all sent one clear message: I'm here to check a box, not to serve. Kim slouched back in her chair, eyes locked on her screen. Texting? Scrolling TikTok? No one knew, and no one cared. One thing was certain: guests weren't on her priority list. Jerome stood there, silent, cleared his throat. No response. He tapped lightly on the counter. Still no response. Finally, he spoke softly. "Excuse me." Before he could even finish the sentence, Kim let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind meant for people who have the nerve to interrupt her while she's busy doing absolutely nothing. She looked up, blinking slowly as if he had just fallen out of the sky. No smile, no greeting, no courtesy. Just one short, cold, indifferent word. What? Put yourself in Jerome's shoes. What would you do in that situation? Stay silent and continue being dismissed, or start teaching someone a lesson? It was as if his presence was just an inconvenience not worth noticing. Jerome kept his voice calm, neither loud nor soft. "I have a reservation. My name is Jerome Wilson." Kim smirked slightly, a half-smile filled with contempt barely disguised as indifference. She turned back to the computer screen, typing lazily, as if her whole body resisted the task. Not seeing your name on the list," she announced flatly. Jerome frowned. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," she replied, her eyes still fixed on her phone as if the conversation had ended a sentence ago. And in that exact moment, Jerome understood. This wasn't a system glitch, not a technical error. This was a person. And it was deliberate. She looked at him, judged him, and in 5 seconds had reached a verdict: not worthy. Jerome took a deep breath. He had met this type before. The kind of person who decides where you belong or don't belong just by looking at your appearance, your skin color, or your demeanor. "Please check again," he asked gently. Kim rolled her eyes like she was humoring a stubborn child. She typed a few more lines, then declared, No, still not there. Sorry. Sorry, she said without a hint of apology. Just the dull monotone of someone reciting lines from a job they despise. Jerome quietly took out his phone, opened the confirmation email, and held the screen up in front of her. I do have a reservation. Here's the confirmation. Kim glanced at it quickly, her attitude unchanged. Well, the system doesn't usually get it wrong. Jerome narrowed his eyes, his voice deepening. My email doesn't lie either. Kim sighed again, longer this time, as if her patience was being tested by a clueless guest. Maybe you booked the wrong hotel. Happens all the time, she said with a familiar mocking smile. The kind of smile that comes from someone who thinks they're above you, who believes they're talking to a fool. Jerome tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. You're saying I'm lost? Kim didn't take it back. I'm just saying it's a common mistake. Jerome clenched his jaw. A flicker of anger rose, but he held it back. What if I'm not lost? What if I did book here? Kim shrugged, playing the perfect role of someone uninvolved. Then maybe the system glitched or something. But Jerome knew this system inside out. It didn't glitch on its own. He was the one who had signed off on every line of code, every interface, every booking protocol. If there was a failure, it had to be human. The way Kim avoided eye contact, the laziness in her every move, the way she refused to check again. He had seen it before, in cases that got covered up in customer feedback that never made it to the leadership team. This wasn't just a personal flaw anymore. This was a toxic culture. In the first 5 seconds of meeting him, Kim had decided Jerome Wilson didn't belong here. He had encountered this kind of invisible rule before, where those who looked the part were welcomed and those who looked different were quietly pushed aside. And most of the time, he let it go, because choosing the right battle is an art. But today, this was different. Jerome pulled out a second phone, the one only people deep inside the system had access to. He entered the internal access code. Within seconds, the result appeared. His name, Jerome Wilson, reservation confirmed, no errors. And on a strange impulse, he checked the activity log. Then he saw something unforgivable. Reservation deleted. Action taken by Kim, front desk staff. Jerome smiled. Bullseye. He looked up, his eyes landing squarely on the name tag pinned to her chest. Kim. The name wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a courtroom coming to order. Jerome held back his smile, though the corner of his mouth curled slightly. Not because he was amused, but because he knew the game was about to end. I'd like to ask you something, Kim. She kept her head down, eyes glued to her phone like her life depended on it. Yeah, she replied absent-mindedly. If someone deletes a reservation from the system, what happens? Kim shrugged, not even looking up. Well, it just disappears from the system, no big deal. Jerome nodded slowly as if savoring each word. So who has the authority to do that? Only front desk staff, obviously. Like me. Jerome tilted his head slightly and replied calmly, yes, exactly like you.
He turned the phone gently so the screen was fully visible. The system log was clear, reservation deleted. Action by Kim. Time less than an hour ago. And for the first time that night, Kim froze. Her eyes darted around, a slight tremble passed through her body. She swallowed hard, her face draining of color as if all the blood had just vanished. I. Jerome leaned forward, his voice dropping low. Smooth as velvet, sharp as a blade. Then tell me, Kim, why did you delete my reservation? Her mouth opened, then closed. Not a single word came out. In that moment, she was no longer the cold, dismissive employee. She was someone caught red-handed with nowhere to hide. Silence. Absolute. Jerome allowed himself a slow smile. Not joy exactly, but a quiet, contained satisfaction. Tonight is going to be interesting. Throughout his career, Jerome had seen every kind of trick: polished lies, corporate backroom politics, even betrayal from those closest to him. But this was something else. He stood there, watching Kim cling to whatever composure she had left, pretending nothing had happened. But her expression betrayed her completely. And strangely, for a brief moment, Jerome almost felt sorry for her. Almost, but not quite. Because she had dug this hole herself, and now it was time for her to lie in it. Kim's fingers trembled as if trying to undo an action that couldn't be undone. But in this reality, there was no undo button. I mean, I didn't, she stammered, panic rising in her voice. Jerome didn't let her finish. Don't make excuses, Kim. The words sliced through the air like a blade, and the way she flinched, eyes wide with shock, was to him almost a living work of art. I, she tried, but her throat locked up. Be quiet. Just 2 words. But they landed with the weight of a verdict. She shut her mouth instantly, so fast she nearly bit her tongue. Jerome almost laughed, not out of amusement, but from a bitter irony. He had met plenty like Kim, people who thought they were far smarter than they actually were. He stepped back, taking a deep breath to steady himself, because if he followed his emotions, he could easily roar across the hotel lobby, call in the managers and security, and let every guest sipping cocktails witness a public reckoning. But no, not now. This wasn't a moment for noise. It needed precision, subtlety, and the right kind of ruthlessness. Jerome leaned slightly against the counter, his eyes fixed on the front desk girl, now visibly shrinking. He gave a smile, not warm, not cold, the kind of smile that signals danger is near. Now, listen carefully, Kim. She swallowed, her lips trembling, her eyes drifting as if looking for an escape route. You are going to find me a room, right now. Kim froze for a second, but as Jerome's stare locked onto her like an order, she couldn't disobey. She turned back to the screen. Her fingers began typing, the keystrokes slow and shaky like the tense buildup of a suspenseful symphony. Yes, I found a room, she stammered, barely able to form the words. Jerome raised an eyebrow. Say it louder. I I have a room, she repeated, more clearly, though her voice still trembled like winter leaves. Of course you do. She picked up a key card and pushed it across the counter with a lifeless slide. No eye contact, no apology. Here, sir. Jerome didn't take it right away. His hand rested loosely on the counter, his eyes still unmoving. What room? 1427, she answered quietly, barely willing to admit it. Jerome sighed, a sigh filled with both fatigue and disappointment. Worst room in the entire building, right? Kim froze. She thought he wouldn't know. Room 1427 was right next to the elevator, constantly noisy from the traffic of people going up and down, beside the maintenance room where staff came and went all day, and the only view, it faced the hotel's trash bins. Jerome knew every inch of this place. He had approved the floor plans, selected the construction materials, and shaped the entire guest experience himself. In Kim's action, this was clearly a petty, cheap act of revenge. But so obvious it was downright foolish. Kim. He tilted his head, his voice calm like a still river before a storm. Do I look stupid to you? Her face twisted. She couldn't shake her head fast enough to deny the undeniable. No, I. Then why did you think you could fool me? Jerome's voice remained soft, but it cut like a knife. You thought I wouldn't recognize the stunt you just pulled? No one spoke. The air in the lobby froze. Even the guests seated far away stopped chewing, stopped sipping. Everyone could feel it. The atmosphere was on the verge of exploding. She had taken one wrong step and now stood at the edge of a cliff. The front desk lobby went completely silent. The nearby guests glanced toward the counter, then quickly pretended to be absorbed in their phones as if they weren't hanging on to every word, every breath. A bellhop in the corner suddenly found his uniform hat to be very interesting. Jerome picked up the key card. His eyes were no longer on Kim, but the air around them stayed tight as a drawn bowstring. Thank you, Kim. Polite words, but there was no warmth in them. He turned and walked slowly toward the elevator. But this wasn't over, not yet. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Jerome walked straight to the desk and opened his laptop. The keyboard clicks were sharp and precise, like war drums, marking the start of a cleanup campaign. This wasn't just a hotel. This was his empire, his pride, his blood, his sweat. And no one had the right to taint it. Jerome accessed the internal system. All the data appeared before him: guest complaints, internal reports, employee records. And then that same familiar name appeared again and again, like ink spreading through water. Front desk staff dismissed complaint without logging it. Guest reported racial discrimination involved party. Kim service denied without providing written reason. Repeated booking errors, guest side, handler, came general sat in silence. This wasn't just an incident. This was the result of negligence, complacency, and worse, the cowardice of weak leadership. The fault wasn't only Kim's, it lay with the person who had allowed her to remain in the system this long. He scrolled further, then saw the name he had already expected: manager Stephen Lane. Name all too familiar from the list of people, all title and no substance. The kind who smiled politely, avoided conflict, and specialized in emails that said, "We will look into it." In other words, Kim was a problem, but Stephen was the root no one dared to pull out. But Jerome was different. He didn't need anyone's permission, and he would pull it out himself. Jerome stood. There was no anger in his eyes now, only the cold clarity of someone in full control. He walked back to the lobby, his steps light, as if strolling through his own kingdom. Kim was still at the desk, her head slightly bowed, but her eyes hinted at relief. Perhaps she was thinking it was over wrong. Very wrong? Drum didn't spare her a single glance. He walked straight to the manager's office and opened the door. No knock, no need. Stephen looked up with the kind of energy only a former high school star still trying to coast on charm could manage. Now, just another adult living on ease. The moment he saw Jerome, his face turned visibly pale. Mr. Wilson, what a surprise! Jerome closed the door behind him quietly, but the click echoed like a verdict. He leaned back against the door, crossed his arms, and stared coldly. Cut it. Stephen, we need to talk. Stephen swallowed hard. Of course. How can I help? Do you have any idea what's happening at the front desk? Stephen fumbled. I think everything's fine. Jerome tilted his head. Wrong answer. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Stephen in his tracks. Just now, your staff member deleted my reservation. A blatant act of discrimination, right at the counter, in broad daylight. Stephen's face drained of color. He swallowed again, voice trembling. Who was it? Jerome tilted his head again, arms folded across his chest. His lips curled, not into a smile, but into the kind of expression that chills without a shout. Take a guess. Stephen's mouth opened, then closed again like a fish gasping for air in the dry, suffocating heat of truth. It was Kim, right? Jerome nodded slowly, as if announcing the final answer on a game show. Ding, ding, ding. Correct. Stephen winced, trying to cling to the last scrap of dignity. Listen to me, Mr. Wilson. I really was going to handle it. I swear. But she's difficult. Jared raised his hand, palm facing Stephen. Be quiet, Stephen. Right now? The words were blunt, final, and full of authority. The air in the room froze. The silence that followed stretched like the pause before a gavel strikes. Jerome stood still, took a long breath, and let the stillness linger for a few more seconds. He wanted Stephen to feel every beat of fear, every second that truth crushed pride. How many complaints have you received about her, Stephen? Over months, maybe even a year, and you did nothing? Stephen stood like a statue, his eyes flickering like a man about to be sentenced. I just thought maybe she needed a bit more training. Jerome laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was dry, sharp, part mockery, part weariness. Good grief, Stephen. This isn't some freshman who forgot how to launch a program. She doesn't need training. She is the problem, and that problem is yours. Stephen lowered his head, his back arching as if weighed down by a burden he could never shake off. Jerome nodded, his voice dropping low and sharp like a fine blade. Here's what's going to happen. You will walk out there in front of all the staff, the guests, and her. And you will fire her immediately. Stephen's eyes widened, his voice filled with panic. Right now, in the lobby, Jerome enunciated every word. Right now. Stephen stood frozen for a few seconds, battling between instinct and the authority before him. Then he understood. He had no choice. He nodded, lifeless. That silence was the overture to a full symphony of justice about to play out in the lobby of a five-star hotel. 2 minutes later, the entire lobby held its breath, witnessing a scene no one could have predicted. Stephen, pale as a sheet, walked up to Kim and announced her termination. Kim resisted tears brimming in her eyes, insisting over and over that it was just a misunderstanding. But it was no use. She was done. Jerome stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. A faint, satisfied smile played on his lips. As Kim stormed toward the door, her face twisted with rage and humiliation, she shot him one final glance, filled with fury. Jerome answered only with a calm smile. Because tonight, justice had been served. The best part, she still had no idea who had just ended her career. Jerome watched her disappear through the door unfazed, every emotion drained away as if he had just removed a tumor from the body of his organization. Justice had been served, but something still felt unfinished. Maybe because Kim never knew who he really was? Or maybe because firing one employee would never fix the root of the problem. He wasn't just here for revenge. He was here to rebuild his empire. Stephen turned to Jerome, drenched in sweat. I handled it, he whispered, voice trembling. Jerome tilted his head, a slight curl at his lips. No, Stephen, I handled it. You just stood there, looking constipated. Stephen let out a weak laugh, thinking it was a joke. But Jerome's eyes didn't laugh. You know I could fire you right now, too, Jerome said, voice as flat as if discussing the weather. Stephen swallowed hard. I swear, Mr. Wilson, I'll fix everything. Jerome raised an eyebrow. Cute. But no, Stephen. You won't fix anything. I will. With that, Jerome turned and walked out. The lobby was now soaked in awkward tension. People pretended not to look, but in truth, this was the kind of real-life drama everyone craved.
Jerome walked straight to the front desk. He leaned forward, scanning the faces of the remaining staff, the ones who had just witnessed a public execution. "Listen up," he said firmly. "Things here are about to change, fast." A young man barely in his 20s nodded rapidly. "Yes, sir. Are you from corporate?" Jerome gave a slight smile, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Close enough." He picked up the desk phone and dialed. The line answered almost immediately. "Wilson here," Jerome said. "Shut down this hotel, launch a full audit. I want every guest compensated, every complaint reviewed, and the entire staff reevaluated. Anyone who doesn't meet standard, let them go. Effective immediately." The entire staff froze. "Wait," someone murmured. You're..." Jerome hung up and slid the phone into his pocket. "That's right, I'm Jerome Wilson." Silence. A young woman gasped. The young man stared like his eyes had turned into saucers. Stephen, standing in the far corner, looked ready to faint. Jerome smoothed his suit, every gesture a display of composed triumph. "Now, if you'll excuse me," he said, walking toward the elevator, "I have an empire to clean up." The elevator doors closed behind him, but in that moment Jerome could feel a shock ripple through the lobby. The realization, the disbelief, all summed up in 3 words: Jerome Wilson. He almost heard them think, "Oh my God, was that really Jerome Wilson?" As the doors sealed shut, he let out a cold smile. Perfect. By the time he returned to his suite, the phone was already buzzing non-stop. The board, operations, maybe even Stephen begging for one last chance. Jerome ignored them all. Let them worry, let them wonder. He opened his laptop and logged into the system. First order of business: purge. Him was blacklisted, not just fired, permanently banned from ever working in any hotel within the group, and Stephen was now standing at the edge. He would get one last chance, just one. Jerome reopened the list of guest complaints, and what he saw went far beyond typical dissatisfaction. Many had been dismissed, ignored, even blatantly mistreated. This wasn't just poor service, this was personal offense, and Jerome would not tolerate that, not in an empire that bore his name. He personally ensured that every affected guest would be fully refunded, upgraded, and granted VIP status on their next stay, because running an empire wasn't just about building, it was about protecting. Knock, knock. A knock on the door. Stephen, his face was paper white. "Mr. Wilson, please, I honestly didn't know." Jerome crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "That's the problem, Stephen. You didn't know what was happening. In your own hotel." Stephen swallowed hard. I can fix this, I swear." Jerome tilted his head, eyes cold. "Did you fire Kim?" Stephen nodded quickly. "Yes, just like you said." Jerome smirked. "Good. Now, pack your things." Stephen froze. "What?" "You heard me. You're done." Jerome stepped closer, his eyes sharp as a blade. "You let this place rot right under your nose. You should have acted. Before I had to..." Stephen broke down on the spot. "Mr. Wilson, please." Jerome placed a hand on his shoulder, gave it a soft tap like a final verdict. "Come on, Steve, I'm sure there's a roadside motel somewhere that could really use your leadership skills." Stephen stumbled backward, unable to say a word. Then, click, the door slammed shut in his face. No second chances, not in this empire. Jerome poured himself a glass of whiskey, sat back in the armchair, and exhaled deeply. The hotel would get better, the business would grow stronger, and next time if any front desk agent thought they could look down on a guest, they would think again. Because now the entire system knew exactly who he was. Jerome Wilson, the founder, the protector, the one who acts when everyone else just stands and watches.